Hi, and welcome to Conversations on the Mind. I'm Denise Cook. I have a PhD in neuroscience, and 10 years ago, I left academia to go on an independent research journey on the inner workings of the mind. It was then, right at the beginning of this journey, that I had an epiphany that emotions were at the basis of our thoughts and our actions, and not the other way around. And although this is well supported in the academic literature, it's not something that comes up very often in a graduate course in neuroscience. And even in psychology, it's not at the forefront of people's minds when you're talking about emotions. Actually, they take a little bit of a they're on the bench, so to speak, when talking about the mind from a psychological and a neuroscience point of view. So since that point, 10 years ago, I've been doing my own independent research on how behavior is linked to our emotional state. And I've been writing on Twitter and on Substack, kind of writing into the void with not very much audience until a few months ago, I serendipitously bumped into someone on Twitter who had come to the same conclusion as I had about the basic principles of the mind, but from an engineering point of view. And to me, this was mind-blowing. This was the first time that I'd met someone that had kind of derived the exact same principles of the mind as I had. I read all of his books. He read all of the stuff I had posted on Substack. And we said, let's start to collaborate on these ideas because they're super powerful. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Rocco Van Schalkwyk. He is a self-proclaimed recluse who has studied independently for 25 years without much outside contact. And he's ready to share his ideas with us. We're very happy to have him on this podcast today to answer some questions for us and to tell us more about his mathematical model of the mind. So, hello, Rocco. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Hi, Denise. Yeah, all good here in Bristol. Thank you, and always happy to talk about the brain, as you know.
Definitely. We're very excited to have you on the podcast. Very excited to talk to you and to introduce your ideas to the world, literally for not the first time, because there's a few books, but the first time in video format. So
Absolutely.
let's get to the first question that I have on my mind is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led to your interest in studying the mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Denise, going back many years ago, I was born in South Africa, went to school in South Africa. And, just thinking back, going back all those years to even to primary school, I remember one day one of my favorite teacher kept me after class, and she said, "Rocco, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." And she said, "Well, when you sit in the class and you look through the window like that, what do you think about?" And I I can't remember what I answered, but that was sort of already in those early days indications that I was just starting to think about stuff. And the more difficult, the better. But my mom actually said that even when I was a small baby, sorry, in a push car, when the other babies used to cry, she just used to put me down outside under the vine leaves, and I just had to look at a single little leaf blowing in the wind, and I would be absolutely happy. And my grandfather at the time told her, "This boy is going to be a philosopher one day," and she believed him, and eventually, he was quite a philosopher himself. He was an academic. He was the chancellor of the University of South Africa eventually. So there's a lot of encouragement and nurturing from my parents to sort of just think. And Denise, I remember one night. Also, I was still young. I went to my dad's study and I knocked on the door and I said, "Dad, can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Of course." And I said, am I allowed to ask if there's a God? And he said, you know, as a scientist, you're allowed to ask any question. Um, and this sort of got me going a little bit, opened the door, so to speak. And then the next thing that happened was I took to writing. For some reason, I can't explain why, I started writing. And I was still at primary school, and I wrote a little book, and about science fiction, and it was just for fun. I didn't think too much of it. And my mom said one day, you know, you're pretty good with this writing. I'm going to ask one of my friends who's a writer to look at your stuff and give you some feedback. And I said, well, okay, you know, okay, yeah, you can do that. Um, and then Denise, I still remember this very vividly. So one Saturday, I was out there in the backyard cleaning my aquarium for my fish tank. And my mom and this lady came out, and they were all, you know, very jubilant and chatting and so on. And then I heard she looked at me and she said, Rocco, I sold your book. Um, and I was amazed, and I almost dropped the aquarium right there. But
And how old were you at this point?
I was 14, 15,
Wow.
yeah, at the time. The book was published when I was about 16. Um, so a very young, interesting experience in the newspapers. You know, we got that coverage, and journalists, you know, interested in this young boy writing. So, but I think it started me off. It gave me confidence to start thinking and dreaming and tackling these big issues. Um, and I think the next thing that happened, just to get, you know, towards the brain bit, um, is I loved philosophy. I wanted to just do philosophy, but I also realized I need to make a living. Um, and for two reasons, I actually decided to go and study engineering eventually. And the one reason was, I'll be honest, I wanted to, you know, make some money. But the other reason was, I um, I thought, if I really want to be good at philosophy and thinking about the big things, I need to have a proper understanding of physics, of chemistry, of engineering design process. I knew some engineers, and I knew I need to understand what they understand first before I can, you know, really try and understand the big things. So I was happy to go and study engineering, studied engineering, and when I got my master's degree, I I entered the industry, and that time in South Africa, that was still the apartheid years, big defense programs going on, and most of us young engineers ended up on one of these defense programs. And I don't want to talk too much about engineering, but this is important for when we get to the brain bit. Um, when I started working on these defense programs, people were talking about something called systems engineering, and I didn't know anything about this. And they said, you know, you got to understand systems engineering, you know, and it's, you know, we just do everything here happens on system engineering. So just long story short, in the early 50s, 60s, designers, engineers got so clever that they started to design very, very complicated things. And they realized as these systems became more complicated, they needed something else. And they resorted to something that they called systems thinking. And the discipline was systems engineering. And what it is all about is just when you work with these very complex systems, um, missile systems, attack aircraft, you know, naval vessels, that sort of thing, thousands of parts over a whole lifetime, you've got to keep your wits about you. So they devised a program, a project, or a discipline really, called systems engineering. And this was help you to decompose a very complex system into smaller subsystems, you know, bits that you can understand. Um, and then you work with these subsystems, and then later you integrate them. And this is over the whole life cycle of a project. And you can think, well, to be honest, NASA in America with their space program, they actually refined systems engineering to a high level. And I had to get training on this discipline and so on. Um, Now, maybe you can see where I'm going with this in terms of the brain,
Hmm.
because it taught us to work with very complex systems, decompose them in their complexity into in subsystems that we can understand, manage, and understand how to integrate it back into the higher level system. Um, Now, I did not go from there and decided, now I want to sort out the brain. I want to understand the brain. It's only now that I look back at my life that I realized it was that constant working on complex projects where we had to decompose all this complexity all the time that must have given me the confidence. And I would say, I would use the word arrogance, to just look at the brain at the time and said, yes, people tell me it's the most complex system in the known universe, but there's no magic here. This is a complex system. It's just another complex system. Uh, I can decompose this. There must be some subsystems involved here. So I should be able to decompose this and get into the, into the guts of it. And my aim was to develop a high level understanding of the brain. There's no magic here. There's no little cupidos running around with bags of love and stuff like that and emotions. And, there must be some systems at work here. And I think at the higher level, one should be able to understand it. So this is where I got really interested in the brain. And I tell you, when I started, I couldn't stop because I was so confident that there is a simple way, if you come from the top down, to understand the brain. And really, that became the basis of my approach. Now, looking back, I think that played a major role in the whole angle that I took to get, the engineering angle to get into the brain. And that's so fascinating, because when I look at your side of the spectrum, for some reason that I don't understand, you also followed that same angle, and that's how we had this meeting of the mind, in terms of our very
Mm-hmm.
similar approaches. But anyway, so from my side, the engineering side, that was an interesting discipline called systems engineering. I still work with it every day. Um, and I think it helped me a lot to come with an approach where we say it's a complex system. We even talk about systems, a system of systems, um,
Mm-hmm.
which I think the brain is. It's a system of systems, and that just set me on that path, to put that very specific approach to the brain, and then eventually develop this brain model that we're going to talk about some more, hopefully.
Right. So it's interesting because what you're describing is similar to reductionism, which is an approach that we take in basic science to decompose the experiment into the simpler parts and then control one set so that you can study one. And at the moment, reductionism is getting a lot of critique from all sides. People like to bring up that the brain is an emergent system, that things kind of emerge from, they can't really tell me from where, from magic, right?
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer in your approach that you have to deconstruct the mind or a bigger system into its smaller component parts, understand the smaller component parts as separate units, and then kind of what happens when you bring them all back together. And I think that's very interesting that we're kind of took the same approach, but for me, from a psychological and science background, and you from an engineering background, and kind of converged in the middle, so to speak. So you don't just have a theory of mind, you've also built a robot, which you call a human-like artificial intelligence. Now you've kind of separated yourself from the main artificial intelligence network, I guess, the big players out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
To you kind of when you describe it, you say that you had to ignore them for 25 years and then
Yeah.
come with your own model that you want to propose to them is the actual solution to how we should build a human-like robot. So why
Mhm.
do you think that your artificial intelligence is better than any other artificial intelligence that is out there right now?
That's a good question and a good challenge. So just to go back a little bit in history, Denise. Obviously, at the time when I started to build my model and sort of take these systems and decompose it and start building these functional systems and algorithms that work together, I got very excited because I thought this could work. And I started talking to people that were working at that time, and I'm going back to the 1980s here, working in artificial intelligence. And I was so excited, and I told them I've got this idea, for the model. It's the whole brain. I can model the whole brain, and it will work. the guy sort of listened to me sort of patiently, but they were just following a sort of a mathematical approach. They were not ready to listen to anything about emotions or pain or creativity or context, or anxiety or all the other aspects I thought was absolutely crucial if you want to model the brain. Um, and I went from person to person. Some of them were experts, some of them to the university. I went to professors and I spoke to them. And every time they would ask me, well, where's your Bayesian inference? Where's your Markov chains? Where's your probabilistic approaches? And the moment I would mention anything around emotions or emotive behavior, or you have to model pain, and then they looked at me funny, and it was like, no, you know, that's not how we do artificial intelligence around here. And to be honest, I have to tell you this. So one day I was back in South Africa, and I was quite despondent, to be honest, because I knew I was onto something exciting, and always this feedback from, no, it doesn't tie up with our models, and you want to do all these other stuff, emotions. We don't do emotions. This is about intelligence. We want to do artificial intelligence. Don't come and talk, to us about, emotions and anxieties and a thing that can feel pain and have subjective feelings. And so one night I thought, we had just had a good barbecue down in South Africa, and I was young and arrogant, and I sat down and I thought, let me just go onto the internet here and just see who in the world will understand my model. And I did a search for famous people and artificial intelligence in the world. It was the olden days, slow internet connection and so on. And, when I looked there, and I saw there's a name there called Marvin Minsky, Professor Marvin Minsky. He's rated as quite an artificial intelligence guru. And for the life of me, there was a telephone number there with his name. And I picked up the phone and I phoned, Professor Marvin Minsky in the United States from South Africa.
And how old
And
are you at this point?
I was probably, I've studied, so let's say past master degree level. So 22,
Late 20s?
24,
Eh,
24, yeah,
yeah.
somewhere around there. So pick up the phone, and he answered, in a big booming voice, just Professor Minsky. And I thought, yeah, Professor, I've got this model of mind that I really think is interesting, and it's a bit different from everybody else's, but I just want to, and immediately it's like, where's your Bayesian inference? Where's your Markov chains? Where's your histograms? And he was very patient, but I just realized, and we spoke for quite a while. Now looking back, I'm surprised that he even, bothered to keep on talking. So he's really listened, but I realized when I put the phone down, nobody's getting it. They are not interested in this approach. So I decided on that evening, I actually decided, you know what? I'm so confident. I'm going to go this alone. I'm going to do this alone. I'm going to stop worrying about the approaches that they follow and just follow my own approach. And occasionally I'll look at what they're doing, but I'm going to just go in isolation. And I became a bit of a recluse, to be honest. And my friends will tell you the guy just disappears. Um, Worked day and night into the small hours of the morning on this idea, on this model.
So it really started to take off in your 20s then?
Yes, and
Yeah.
and 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 to be honest, I
But you'd
actually
already
want.
thought before you approached Marvin Minsky, did you already have a framework of mind set? You
Yes.
didn't have any robots, but you had.
No, I had some early
Okay.
robots,
Okay.
and we should do a video on that as well.
Hmm.
Very, very simple. The one robot just had a hand and an eye, and it was literally just to test the emotion. When
Okay.
it gets hungry, what does it do? So few simple ones like that. But I had a framework. I was confident enough to have a discussion with him about the model.
Hmm.
And then
You
I
had
and
a
I and I.
theory, and had you written? You once told me that you've written a book, like 600-page book of mathematical model of the mind. Was that completed by that point, or did this come
N-
later?
No. I've
No.
I've written a lot at that
Yeah.
stage because I also decided to patent this
Right.
approach, um, and that's also a bit of a story. So I went to a patent attorney and I said, I've got this model of mind. It explains absolutely how the brain works in every way, and you can build robots with this. And he said, okay, leave this with me for 2 weeks. And 2 weeks later, I went back to the patent attorney and he said, yeah, he looked at me bemused and he said, Rocco, you haven't got the money to pay for my time to try and understand what you've written down there. And so what I did was I realized it's not going to work. I wrote up my own patent specification and I just patented it for the sake of getting, a date stamp on there and just say, for scientific reasons, this is my model, and I moved on from that. So already at that stage, it was mature, and I was starting to do building little robots, little platforms to test some of these ideas. But I think I should just come back and talk a little bit about the other artificial intelligence at the time, because at the moment,
Hmm.
artificial intelligence is having a hard time.
It is,
They
and but it's taken a life of its own.
it's got definitions of its own, it's got a life of its own,
Hmm.
and some of the big names are now saying it's hitting a wall. It's hitting a wall. We don't know. You know, interesting thing happening in terms of these chatbots and the language models. On the one hand, it looks mind blowing. On the other hand, it's not real. Um,
Hmm.
it's not
These
real
are sort of
intelligence.
algorithms that are just functioning on a bunch of human text, right?
It, it,
All of their experience is human driven experience. They don't have any lived experience.
exactly right. So they
Hmm.
will tell you what other people have written down. They will sort of collect all of that information and precipitate out an answer for you.
Hmm.
So you'll ask the language model a question, and you'll get a precipitated answer from a lots of different sources. But it's never a subjective experience. It's never a subjective view. Um, the chatbot never learned to
No.
ride a bicycle, or it can't talk to you about being bullied on the playground, or it doesn't even know what it feels like to stand in the rain. So it's a different type of intelligence, and we can talk about that. And I
Hmm.
think it's important that we just compare what I've done with what's out there today.
Right, and you've always been very clear that your robots are to test a model of the mind and not necessarily to be a useful tool to humans, as the field of artificial intelligence has kind of gone to, creating algorithms that can, post a Twitter feed based on my likes or what I paid attention to like 2 seconds before. It is not really, that's not really your goal here.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because my focus was absolutely to model the human mind. And when I built simulations and robots to test this, because I got curious, I had this model and I thought, but hang on, what will happen if I put this in a little simulation, in a little agent? Will it come alive? Will it show all these behaviors and learn and have emotions and so on? So I did that, and for the life of me, it happened.
Came
Um, and
alive.
I, and I, it was one of the great. I remember that night. So when the first time, I call it the Pinocchio moment, when this little agent became, and alive. And I mean, talking really, really simple stuff here. But yes, it's important that my focus was always on building proof of concept demonstrators to prove the model and to help explain the human mind. Um, and I could at any time have changed what these little robots do to make them much more efficient, much more clever, much more, full of tricks and gimmicks.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but I never did that. I always said, I know I can make it go faster. I know I can make it learn faster. But I want to stick puristically with what happens in the human mind and stick with that and let them
Right, because
demonstrate.
people seem to forget that we take 18 years or more to kind of
Yeah,
mature and to be able to make decisions on our own, to take care of ourselves. Like humans have this long kind of learning period over which that they're being helped by
yeah, yeah.
parents, by other humans, and actually being helped by other humans continues throughout life. So there's always, you know, there's never really what you would call independent learning.
Exactly right. You keep on learning,
Right.
and
We're always dependent on either books that other people have written. We're dependent on people to get our groceries to the store, to go
yeah.
and buy, right? Like humans kind of exist as a beehive, is how I've looked at it.
It's very true, and you know, some people will criticize my model and say, but you know, it's first of all, it's not complex enough to generate all
Hmm.
the complexity. And what you're saying now is very true. So when you go back and you go to the day that you switch the robot on, it is very simple. It's like a child that's just been born, and it needs to learn. And yes, it takes a long time. I can make it go faster, but I don't want to deviate from what the human brain does. So yes, it will take slowly. So what we get is a little robot. I've actually got the little robot here. Let me just try and show you. You know, so there's a little
This is
robot in
this is
a
Troopy.
Troopy in
Hmm.
his learning confine.
Your
Um,
stormtrooper.
yeah, and that was just mischief on my side
Hmm.
to make it look like a little trooper. But it will, you know, after 3 or 4 uh, hours of training, it'll start to be a little bit like a baby. You know, it'll get hungry, it'll cry. Um, First, I will have to show it, you know, to go to the food source, and then it'll learn to go there by itself. Slowly, I have to do this a couple of
Hmm.
times until it'll learn to navigate um, to the food source. Um, Very simple, but within that are the first algorithms that will teach it to think, and this includes, if it doesn't know what to do, to guess what it must do. And I always tell people, as simple as it is, just push button one to get the food. And then I scramble the buttons around and let Troopy decide or figure out which button he must push to open the food source. Such a simple little demonstration.
Hmm.
I always tell people it's that algorithm, that simple algorithm, that after many, many years is going to help him solve the problem of building a jet engine or building a spaceship, or it's the same algorithm that's in the brain.
Right.
It's just had a time to learn.
Right. And a
So
lot of times you've said that your model is kept simple because you believe that people can scale it up in their minds. Like, what could be possible if we added, you could also add a neural network, better
yeah,
vision, better sound, like better sensors, right?
yeah, yeah.
What could happen if the robot was pushed to its limits and had these intelligence algorithms that you're talking about, like in it, and it allowed the time, right, to experience a lot of the world that it needs to experience to solve its problems.
It'll literally, I claim, um, develop in a human-like fashion. So you should see human emotions, you should see human learning and human behaviors coming out. And although we just train them for an hour or two, you do start to see that. We even put expressions on the faces of these little robots, so
Hmm.
you can see, the hunger when it starts to cry. You see the sad little face. Then you see when it learns to navigate to the food source, the desperation. It's still hungry, but it feels better because it recognizes the path. And you see these emotions fluctuate or flit across its face. Becomes very, very lifelike.
Hmm. So
And I think the
let's
main
take
thing
us,
is,
yeah, go ahead.
no, and it's based on the functional algorithms that I think uh, is what constitutes the mind. And when we decompose the mind, this is the basic algorithms that you need in its simplest form to have on day one when that baby is born. And all you need then, and people struggle to scale this up, but all you need then is this operand learning, where the agent just learns from experience, and eventually will learn even language, will even learn words, just like humans. Um, and that's important. I mean, that is the bit where you will see currently the chatbots, the language models, people cram it full of information, learn, upfront learning, cram it full of information, hoping that it'll be very clever. Um, and yes, it can provide answers, but in so many cases, it hasn't got that, like you say, that experience, that real life subjective experience. Um, and so in so many aspects, when you ask it a question, it'll tell you, I can't relate, you know, I can't relate.
Hmm.
And here's the point, here's the thing. Although it takes a long time for a robot to learn like this, for an agent with this model to learn, I still think ultimately, if you want to build a truly intelligent system, you will have to go through these processes of hand-eye coordination, touch, learn to feel, learn what is your hand, what is not your hand, what is environment, what is, you know, otherwise you can build something that can write a PhD paper,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't know what its fingers are or where the keyboard is.
Right.
Um, so in a way, I think the human brain is optimized to learn. I know it takes a long time, but to really get,
So
you know,
basically, what you're saying is there's a lot more to intelligence than just simply knowing how to read and write, right? That's
e-
what these
e-
natural language models are. I mean, they're not even, well, it's hard to kind of define what they're understanding, but they're basically language models. They're copying human language.
exactly right. Now it
Right.
is interesting. It is interesting. I would say, depending on your definition of intelligence, you could deem them a source of intelligence. You could deem them an intelligent system. Because if your definition of intelligence is, if I put a problem to it, it must come with a solution to me, a good solution quickly. If it can do that, it's intelligent. Now, if you look at these chatbots these days, they do that. You give them a question, they come back with a good answer quickly. Just like humans, you
Mm-hmm.
can't always be sure, you know, that
If
the
they're
answer is
being,
the correct. Yeah,
yes,
you know,
exactly.
it's just like humans. They
Mm-hmm.
sometimes get it wrong, but they do come up with an answer.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
so
they
you
sound
can
quite
call,
confident, like
yeah,
humans.
exactly right, and you don't know,
Yeah.
and they will probably learn, and we must expect them to
Mm-hmm.
learn and get more accurate in how they precipitate out this information from all the sources um, available to them. It can be deemed as an intelligence source, but what I would want to, kind of plead for in terms
Mm-hmm.
of the artificial intelligence fraternity is just, let's get the definitions right. If you define intelligence, and in the AI community, people, they
There's
can't
all sorts
agree
of
on
definitions, right? Yeah, they can't
exactly.
agree on what intelligence is. And you've actually written a book called Understanding Intelligence, and we'll add links to the in the comments. And that's
That
what I wanted to talk to you about. Like, you have a definition of intelligence that's kind of not consensus, but is very much in line with what I think intelligence is. So I'd like to chat a little bit about what you think intelligence is, or versus artificial intelligence, and why you think emotions are important for intelligence.
Yeah, that's important. So um, with my model, obviously I came from an interesting angle, and I ended up with a definition of intelligence which once again will not sit well with your average sort of artificial intelligence enthusiast, because it leans heavily on the human mind. And in fact, it starts off with an understanding of how dreaming happens in the brain. And something called, if we look at daydreaming, it's something called mind wandering, um, which I've called threading. And bear with me, because this is important. And I'm sure people are, sort of
Mm-hmm.
falling out of their chairs and just saying, no, hang on, you're talking about dreaming here. How are you going to get to intelligence? But this mind wandering was actually, it's proven. They've stuck people in fMRI systems, um, and so specifically, this one test they did was to tell people to just think of nothing, and they did these scans, and they realized, even when you think of nothing, your brain conjures up associations, and it threads through these associations. And what they pick up in the fMRI scan is the emotions, so the different emotion states, which they can pick up. So obviously, in your brain, even when you think about nothing, when you put your brain in neutral, uh, it threads through thoughts. Now, my intelligence definition is basically related to this, and this comes from the fact that what I've picked up is, when we try and solve a problem, we would get into a new situation, a novel situation, we'll stare at something. Let's say we're looking at a drawer with a handle on, and we're looking for the chocolates. We haven't seen this drawer before in our lives, but we've seen similar drawers, you know, and we've learned that similar drawers, we take the handle, we open it, and so on. Now we are faced with this drawer, looking at this drawer, and our brain naturally goes into this threading state. It brings up thoughts, associations, um, and what we learn to do in life is to actually direct this sort of daydreaming. We learn to direct it, to make the brain focus on helpful associations. So where we would, when we daydream, when you sit at a coffee shop, you'll think about anything and everything, and your mind truly wanders. Um, so this is a helpful feature. It brings up all these associations, and what we learn to do is when we look at that drawer, is to, by staring at it and focusing on it, to actually direct the brain to say, bring up thoughts, carry on with that mind wandering process, but bring up relevant thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
What I look at, I want thoughts around this. And that's when you sort of look at the door and you remember, hang on, yesterday at grandma's house, there was a drawer, looked not quite the same, but when I opened it, I got the chocolates. And now that gives you the action. Try opening the drawer, and there you find the chocolate. So now you have
You
solved a
call this
problem.
directed threading.
I call this directed
Right.
threading. So threading is just the normal mind wandering, the daydreaming. And
Mm-hmm.
then what we learn to do is we learn from a young age, this is very handy. These thoughts that come up, sometimes they can help me solve a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and we learn to use that skill
And it
to
seems when you
solve.
have an urgent need that the mind wandering becomes more directed,
Ex-
right?
ex-
Like
ex- ex-
it,
Exactly
when
right.
you're
So
anxious, it kind of tunnel visions the mind to a set of solutions that could help you solve these problems,
that's exactly. You get
right?
the
And
adrenaline going, you get
yeah.
the anxiety going, and this focuses the mind. But in the
Mm-hmm.
back, it's the same process that runs of bringing up thoughts. I'm not going to say random thoughts or
Mm-hmm.
associations, because there is a system, and my model explains how
Right.
the brain chooses these random thoughts. So they're
Well, you
not
kind of
random.
go from, like if you were thinking about a cat and then you think about your cat or other cats and then cats in different situations, right?
That
And you've likened this to a search engine, like how Google is functioning.
Exactly right. So in a certain given situation, let's say you quickly have to solve a problem with your cat. Maybe your cat has fallen into the fish pond or something like that. You will think about something. Adrenaline would be there. You'll be focused, and the associations that you'll bring from your mind will be those ones that have made emotional impact on you.
Mm-hmm.
So in my model, I give a high rating. As you know, I call it the impact factor of an association, heavily influenced by the emotions involved at the time, how often you've experienced it, and how recently you've experienced it. And these I combine into something called an impact factor. So every association has got an impact factor, which very much, normally it's heavily weighted by the emotion, either good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
that happened, was involved with when that association was formed. So when you have solve a problem, you would automatically, preferentially, look at these associations with a high impact factor, with a high value, so to speak, um, and then try the actions associated with that, to try and solve a problem.
So
So
it seems
so
like
so emotion, yeah.
right. And it seems like your intelligence is heavily based on experience. Is that right? Like a more intelligent robot will be one that can solve more problems because it has encountered these problems or something similar in the past.
Absolutely right. So
Right.
so 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 my model, like the human brain, learns through operant learning.
Mm-hmm.
It means sort of it gets from reward states. When it solves a problem and it gets a reward state, that's when an association gets embedded in the brain quite vividly, again with a high impact factor.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it works very easily. And as the robot learns, obviously the association database will grow, filled with little experiences. It'll start to associate objects, and with Troopy, as we've seen, he learns to navigate from anywhere in his confine to the food source. Um, so he gets all those associations. So as the association database grows, the robot has got a bigger body of knowledge to access and try and solve problems. And obviously, the likelihood that there would be something of relevance becomes higher. So if a robot has navigated through many different kitchens and looked through drawers, when you now bring the robot into a new kitchen, never seen before, it'll be helpful if that robot has seen drawers, kitchen utensils, worktops, all those things before, and it'll immediately not make stupid errors like, look for food in the dustbin or something like that. It'll go to the drawers, try the drawers, make fairly intelligent choices, but it remains and this is interesting, it remains a guess. Either the robot knows exactly, I've opened that drawer before and there's no stress, there's no worries, I can open it again. But if the robot hasn't seen the drawer before, it'll have to draw on what it has seen before. And that's when it goes through a process of, I haven't seen this before, but this looks like X that I've seen before. And therefore, I'm going to try and do exactly what I did when I experienced X. So it's and even
that's
you and
the
I.
directed threading part.
That's the
Whenever there's
directed.
this increase in anxiety, it kind of kicks this directed threading into gear. What is the closest matching solution that I've seen in the past?
Yeah, and that's very, very powerful. This sort of inference and inductive thinking is very, very powerful. You hear the AI guys talk about this a lot, and they struggle to get it going in their systems. For an intelligent AI system to step into a situation completely novel, has never seen this problem before. Many of their systems just can't deal with that. So
they
this
have
is
to be
interesting.
trained for every single situation. That's
Yeah,
traditional AI has to have seen the exact situation before
yeah.
to solve the problem now.
Exactly right. And with Troopy and with this sort of robot, it's actually funny because it is almost in an extreme. And let me give you a simple example. If I teach Troopy to eat an apple, grab an apple and eat it, let's say a one-off experience. You're hungry, you're very hungry. There's the apple, you eat it. Wow. Now you learn this is what you want to do. If I replace the apple with a cricket ball, with a red cricket ball, just looks a bit like the apple, Troopy will come the next time. He will move right up to the cricket ball and try and eat it.
Right.
He's just, it's all he's got in his brain is something red, something round, and
It's pattern matching.
exactly right, and
And it's
knowing
not has to
nothing.
be it's like kind of a fuzzy pattern matching.
It's very fuzzy, and you can give it a tolerance. You can build into the model. You can just say if it's 10%
Likely.
overlap, if it is
Right.
similar, you assume it is similar and give it a try. So at the moment, Troopy is like, if he just sees anything red, he will think, oh, apple, I'm going to eat that. And of course, just like a human, just like a baby, it needs to learn and say, hang on, that is not an apple. That is a cricket ball.
Does it kind of learn that nuance then? So it tries that apple, it gets disappointed because
That
that's not an apple. And
that's
then
the
it
key
has to
word.
categorize that as not apple. And so what's
Exactly right.
interesting is that your association database allows for this categorization without actually formally saying that there's categorization, right? The emotions
And
just kind of
e-
um,
exactly.
the baseball bat will become less of a source of
Mhm.
emotional salience for when you're hungry. It'll just kind of fall to the end of the association database.
Exactly right. And you use the word
Right.
disappointment, and that's actually what happens because this is an emotional exercise.
Right.
It is solving a problem, but it's all driven by emotions. So when Troopy goes to the apple, and now it's a cricket ball, try and eat the cricket ball, it's disappointed. So that anticipated satiation never takes place. And in fact, there's a disappointment, which is now a learning exercise, which says the whole value of this red object is now degraded. It's disappointed me. I was expecting to be satiated, and now I'm in deprivation. So this cricket ball goes into the association database not as a satiation source, not as a reward source, but as a source of disappointment. Um, and it'll stay like that until maybe later in his life he plays with a cricket ball and says, hang on, there's another side to this cricket ball,
Right.
it's a fun object. So and so it learns and it updates. these
So it's interesting because
associations.
it's actually developing nuance
Exactly right.
from experience, right?
Yeah,
This
and
this this cricket ball is novel. I'm interested in it, but it's not food.
yeah,
What
yeah.
can it do for me?
Exactly right. And what's also interesting, and you touched on something that's quite important there, Denise, is all of this is simply driven by emotions.
Right. And
So,
that we want to talk more about emotions because that's like the
yeah,
interesting part of this, right? And like
yeah,
how you say that your robots have emotions, but how do you do this?
it's ambitious. And I know the stunned
This is the
faces.
key part of the model, right?
Yeah, and I tell you, the stunned faces I've seen over the past 25 years, um, when I start off with emotions, and and you get people are very patient and they want to hear me out, but for the life of me, it's not something that people are really immediately sort of in agreement with. So for me to claim that my robots can feel subjective emotions is quite something. And I mean, it goes to the point. I don't know if you're aware of this Chalmers sort of hard problem principle, where some people just believe it's impossible. You can't build a machine that can have subjective emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but of course, probably one of the most powerful things of this model is the fact that I claim I can build subjective emotions in a system. The model stands on two legs. It's very much depends on the emotions to tell it what it needs to do. And then it's got the intelligence part, which tells it how to do it. So, and there's your little systems engineering
Right.
decomposition, two basic subsystems where you have the emotion part, tells it what to do, and the intelligence how to do
How
it.
to do it exactly,
And
yeah.
many of the modern systems that people develop in AI, because they haven't got emotions, they know how to solve problems, but they don't know why.
Right.
A language model is not going to come up and decide it needs to solve a problem by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it has no initiative. It has no emotions. It has no,
It
you know,
has no valuing system. It has
y-
nothing that it cares about unless you give it something to care about.
exactly, and certainly no
Right.
subjective feelings.
No.
Um, and maybe we should just talk a little bit about these emotions, because I know it's a tricky one, but let's
Mm-hmm.
have a go. Let's have a go.
Right.
Um,
How do you give your robot subjective
yeah.
feelings? Or what is the subjective feeling?
Yeah. So what I realized right at the beginning was, in our lives we grow up, become grown up, and on the way we learn words like aggressive, glad, feel good, feel bad, sad, disappointed. And this is now when we grown up already. Um, and then people try and analyze emotions, and they try and classify these things, and they want to sort of put them into groupings, and they define emotions, and they say there are 5 basic emotions, or there's
Mm-hmm.
7 basic emotions, or and what I thought was, hang on, there's another way to do this. Let's go right back to where emotions originate, because all of these things that we learn in society follows a long trail of learning, of operant learning. Let's go back to where it all starts. And that's when I looked at the homeostasis mechanism in
Mm-hmm.
in the brain. Um, and just to explain homeostasis, it's not everybody knows what it means, but homeostasis is just a fancy word for basically what a thermostat does. Um, so if you connect a thermostat to a room, and you say, if it gets cold, you must make the room hotter, and if it gets cold, and if it gets warm, you must make the room colder. Keep it at homeostasis. Keep the level, at the optimum level. When you digress or away from that level that we want to keep the room temperature at, that is not a good thing. That is bad. You must do something to bring it back to normal. So switch on the air conditioner, the heaters, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Do that. So a thermostat is a good way to just think about this concept of homeostasis. Um, and
So basically, it's having a set point that you want to maintain throughout, but at certain points, you kind of deviate from that and you have to search something from the external environment to kind of fix it.
Exactly right. And if you
You
look
have
at
to make a
emotions,
change.
yeah, to fix that deficit.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at these at the brain, you find many control systems um, in the brain. Hunger, thirst, and this took me a long time to figure out that pain was also
Mm-hmm.
actually a homeostasis mechanism.
And when you
Um,
say that, was there something lacking from the robot when it didn't have pain?
I I had this is an interesting one. I had the whole model finished, and
Mm-hmm.
this was a complex process. Took many years to just fill in all the gaps. And for the life of me, pain wasn't there. I couldn't nail pain. And I tell you, Denise, I was sitting there literally for months, for years, pinching myself and trying to figure out how does this happen? What is pain? Um, until I realized that there's nothing missing in my model. It's just another homeostasis
Right.
process. It just happens so quickly that it's confusing, because when you feel pain, when you pinch yourself, the deficit, the divergence shoot up so quickly that it actually it creates a algorithm that looks a little bit different, but it's the same thing. When
Mm-hmm.
you get hungry slowly. When you eat food, you feel better, comes down, homeostasis is restored, and you're back to your, like you say, your set point. Only thing that happens with pain is it happens often, not always, but often it happens much quicker. So you put your hand in the fire, and where hunger took, like, a couple of hours to develop into a state of divergence and something you don't want, pain just in a second or two is just ouch, you know. So that was what, and the nice thing about that was I didn't have to change my model at all. I
Right.
just had to
You just had to add
realize.
it in. And
Exactly
does
right.
Troopy, because everything we're talking about, everything has to have a sensor that
Yeah,
humans use to interface kind of with the external
yeah.
environment. We have eyes so that we can
Mhm.
see where we're going. We have ears to hear. So does Troopy have pain sensors?
I have tricked him into believing that he has.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you look at in his confine, there's a big round black line around his little learning confine, and that's the wall. That's the wall. So Troopy has got a little light sensor um, at the back and in the front. When Troopy moves onto the black line, it effectively tells it it's bumped into the wall. Okay, so it's painful. First, it just touches, it's just tactile sense. But if it really moves with speed into onto the
Hmm.
black line, that equates to pain. And I've done quite a complex bit of modeling around going from light pressure to more pressure to heavy pressure to pain. Um,
But this is
that's
all
that.
determined by light,
Yes,
right? What
yes.
you're saying? So it's using vision as a
Yeah,
proxy for how close it is to, or how fast it's moved into these walls.
Exactly right. And
Okay.
then the moment it moves into the wall, it experiences the sudden pain. It's quite cute
Hmm.
to see because he goes ouch and he moves back
Yeah.
from the wall. And here's the interesting thing: from that event, the model will generate fear of that
Right.
specific position in Troopy's mind. So it's so cute when you see Troopy then after that move in that same direction. You suddenly see, oh, now he's very careful. He's worried. So what happens there is fear as an emotion is now elevated. And even if he's hungry, even if he's thirsty, even if he wants to play, when he look at that area, fear now dominates, and he'll say, "Hang on, I I mustn't bump into the wall again."
And
Um,
what's interesting is that you haven't actually encoded fear into the robot.
no, no,
No,
and
you have pain, you have hunger, you have thirst, and then he starts to experience fear of hunger, fear of thirst, and fear of pain as like
exactly,
upcoming. He's predicting his upcoming deficit or
exactly right.
deviation
And
from homeostasis.
that's the other thing. So the homeostasis is the basic type of emotion
Hmm.
that I've developed. Um, I have many people have thought of this idea that homeostasis could be the basis of emotions. That's not new, um, but what I've gone to a next level is to build in the level of urgency in terms of these deficits or departures from the set point. To give you a simple idea, Tupi could be 30% thirsty and 40% hungry. So that urgency is important, because in the brain, just like in the human brain, Tupi will now decide, I'm more hungry than I am thirsty. I must attend to being hungry first.
It's
I must
prioritizing.
prioritize that. Now, you'll know probably from the neuroscience point, the brain gets fed with all these inputs like reflexes and fears and emotions and so on. And then it needs to decide, what is my priority? And, you know, as you know, people blame this on different areas in the brain. But if you look at the basal ganglia, you might well find an area where they say, well, this is where the emotion, the execution decision is made. It weighs up all these inputs and decide, you know what, you're more hungry than you are thirsty. We're gonna sort hunger out. Let's see where we are. Let's see how we get to the apple. Let's use our association database to get to the apple. The moment Troopy has eaten the apple, obviously thirst will still be high, could be higher, and they'll say, now I need to drink something as a priority. So, and just to come back, you mentioned something interesting there I want to come back to. This whole ability of this model to actually also create emotions that are fear of is very, very important. And I call it the second set of emotions called allostasis emotions. And this is interesting. This is all to do with the internal stress states that the human also generate. So when you are hungry, you are not just worried about, you don't have just a physical body sensation of, you know, I need to eat something. There's also an anxiety that gets generated. And this is very important. And just like the hunger gets satiated, the anxiety gets calmed when the food is found and ingested. So there's this anxiety calm sort of emotion that also parasitically goes hand in hand with all the other emotions. And what
And
makes
we're
this
calling, so just so people are aware, we're calling hunger, thirst, pain, we're calling these kind of basic emotions, whereas in the literature you wouldn't really find them as emotions. People have before talked about them as primordial emotions, but they won't be found in any books on even the basic emotions, correct?
That's right. So we've taken it quite a bit further. We call them body UTRs,
Body
urgency to
emotions, yeah.
yeah. So urgency to restore mechanisms is my name for it. But that's just to say it's homeostasis with a bit of urgency thrown in there,
Right.
and with a bit of operand learning thrown in there.
But what they are is that these are kind of the basic homeostasis or negative feedback loops on top of which all the other emotions are kind of built.
Exactly right. So,
right? You don't actually have to code all of the emotions for the robot to feel these emotions, which is like mind-blowing.
That's so nice. That's so great. I think it brings an answer to what everybody has been, you know, wrecking their brains about. Is just, you know, and I think you said this. It's like emotions is on a continuum. Yeah, you know, it's not discrete. Little states that you can go in and say, that's disappointment. You know, that's aggravation. You know, that's jealousy,
anger, fear.
fear. What we say is we've got these basic body homeostasis states, and then what they go and do within the context of the operand learning. So in terms of the experience of the robot, you know, all those experiences get tagged with emotions, with these basic body emotions, and that gives a kind of a flavor or a color to that association. And you can have every single association will actually have its own unique sort of combination of these emotional states.
Right. And that's the body UTRs.
That's exactly right.
But they'll
So,
also have a brain UTR
yeah,
tagged with them.
exactly
This
right.
anxiety, calm state that you're talking about.
Exactly. So what we find is, I mean, this should make sense. When you get hungry, you have a hunger event, you find food, you eat something, you remember a lot of stuff. When you think back, of that hunger event, you don't get hungry again. We call it an emotion, but that emotion just does not get re-evoked when you think about it. When you think
Mm-hmm.
about pain, for instance, you don't feel physical pain again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what you do feel is the anxiety that went with that emotion, you know, uh, and that state, emotional state, is saved with every association, and that's the one when you recall something, anything, that emotion is re-evoked immediately. So when you
Mm-hmm.
think about
And
a
that's
hamburger,
what gives you fear or anticipatory fear.
precisely.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about a hamburger, you don't feel hungry again, but you have a sort of a good feeling. You had a sort of
Mm-hmm.
feeling, almost like a calm feeling. You like looking at a hamburger, especially when you're hungry. Gives you a good feeling. Doesn't tense you up. It doesn't stress you out. Another object, maybe if you look at the angry dog, you will from memory remember that that dog, bit you, and you experience pain. See the dog again, you don't feel pain, you feel the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these two types of emotions: body, we call it body UTRs and brain UTRs. And people read my stuff will see why I call it UTRs.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, you've got then from the association database, when you recall an association or a memory, it re-evokes, it regenerates that sort of allostatic emotion, the stress one. And
The
this is where
the brain UTR,
the
basically.
brain UTR, and
Okay.
this is where you say, now, when I think about something, I get a fear of not having food. I'm not hungry. I get a fear of not having food or not having fun or having pain. And this is
Mm-hmm.
so powerful because now the robot it doesn't just learn to in situ learn to eat when it's hungry. It actually learns to, in an anticipation, solve problems. The robot doesn't like to feel fearful of not be of being hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So because it wants to avoid that state, that negative emotion state, it solves for what can I do to make this feeling go away? What I can do is to have a plan what I will do when I get hungry.
That's
And very
interesting because
few,
now the brain UTRs have taken on an importance of their own. The
yeah,
actual physical state of being hungry and thirsty doesn't exist yet, but we're planning on it coming in the future because we know that it repeats itself.
exactly. And we're fearful
Hmm. And we're
of that.
fearful of
Yeah,
experiencing that again.
yeah. And to be
Especially if
honest,
you get into these very, like we've talked about this before, especially if you get very, very thirsty, probably thirstier than anyone here has ever experienced
yeah,
before, then we get very fearful of having that state again.
exactly right. If you look at the human brain, when you get so very, very thirsty, that's clear indication and proof that the sympathetic nervous system kicks in a big way. So there's your proof right there. All these things that I'm talking about, by the way, nicely sits within the biological brain. You and I have had
And
a little look,
we've actually done a validation
validation.
against the thirst literature to see that all of these principles are kind of, they're all accepted out there.
They're all present
Hmm.
in the brain. So that's very exciting. And more, what we will see, I hope, is that the theory of this Xzistor model of mind, as I call it, um, lives in the biological brain. And I think we should proceed with that process to validate it. But it's true. And just to come back to this allostatic type emotions that we also feel in your and my life, most of what we do and experience are these fear of emotions. you know we're lucky.
Hmm.
We've got food, we've got shelter, we're not in the cold, we avoid pain. So really, as we learn, all these nuances and subtleties creep into life, and our whole existence become much more about dealing with fear of. I'm fear of embarrassing myself.
Hmm.
I'm fear of not playing good golf. I've got a fear of getting malaria on my trip. 99% of our lives is driven by these fear states, these anxiety states, and then we
Hmm.
solve them by thinking. Sometimes even we just think about a solution, we feel better.
Hmm.
Malaria. Oh, hang on, I got the vaccination. Um, you know, although
That problem solved. I don't have to
yeah,
worry about it anymore.
I'm not sure if there is a malaria
No,
vaccination.
I think you have to take a few pills
Yeah,
before you go.
yeah.
Ah,
But it is interesting, and that's a very powerful. If you look at the other AI systems at the moment, I don't think there's anything where a system can go into that sort of level of prediction and solve problems even before they have occurred. That'll be interesting to see. Um,
right. And it seems a
yeah.
lot like fear is. Do you think fear is driving a lot of human decision making? And
Yes,
how do you think that plays?
yeah,
Yeah.
to be honest, I think fear is very, very prominent. I
Mhm.
actually, to be very honest with you, after working with this model for so many years, I feel sorry for people. I feel sorry for humans, you know, because if you look at this model and you look at the human brain, how much of what we do is out of fear. Denise, it gets crazy. If you walk into your house and you try and avoid bumping into the walls and hurting yourself, that's driven by a subtle fear in your brain of hurting yourself by
Mhm.
walking into the walls. You know, it goes to that level. And then all the other fears in your life, all the social fears, the social stresses, people, competition, you know, reputation, family, fears around family that can get ill,
Mhm.
or over even die. Um, we are permanently reminded of these fear states because our mind, the brain, want to bring this to your attention because this is what you must
Right.
solve
Mm-mm.
to survive.
Right. And these are
um,
things that we're attached to. It kind of goes back to like the Buddhist suffering. Like human the human condition is suffering. We're suffering
it,
through these anxieties and these fears and trying to like solve them, right? And if we don't have any anxieties, we create them because everything becomes exactly more nuanced and subtle. We're trying to optimize ourselves, optimize systems, and you can kind of see that actually in the modern world and how like everything becomes about optimization. The
it
fitness world is optimization. The
yeah,
nutrition world is optimize. Like, how do we get optimal nutrition, optimal fitness, and even especially productivity world, right? Everything's
it's
more, 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 better, better, better than the other person.
exactly right. It's all driven by this fear, um, and the sense of competition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there comes a point when it becomes counter sort of productive to the human brain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one must take a step back. Now, the interesting thing is about what you mentioned is I have to mention this. The model indicates that and explains why we would generate fear even if there is no fear.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I know people will actually, well, you can look at a board game, even you can look at a simple game that children play. We go, and the game is all about generating an artificial sense of suspense or anxiety, and then there should be relief. Even humor, if we define
Mm-hmm.
humor, it could be very, very subtle. But what happens with humor? Somebody tells a joke, builds up a story that builds a bit of suspense, and then in the twist, or the sort of the bottom line, the punchline of the joke, something twists and it's relief.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's a clown, or it goes as far as bungee jumping, where somebody will say, perfectly happy, enough food, enough, drink, no pain, all the other emotions are sorted. And then somebody will walk up to a bridge and say, I'm going to jump off this bridge because I want an adrenaline rush.
Right, because they are experiencing that fear of heights that's kind of natural to humans, right?
It's not, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and they have to
Um,
they jump off to I don't know, counteract that fear or conquer that fear, or not even just to feel the relief when they don't hit the bottom, I guess.
exactly right. It's the relief of
Mhm.
of not hitting the bottom. And obviously, we know before the time, we're probably not going to die when we do bungee jumping, but the body can't help acting in a reflexive manner. So the body is still going to pump the adrenaline. It still experiences the fear of heights. Um, Although the conscious mind is telling it, I'm probably not going to die now. The the primitive part of the body still generates the adrenaline and stuff. And then
You
it
can't
builds.
really separate from your body.
Exactly.
Right? Your mind, you can kind of teach yourself techniques to kind of calm yourself down, but the emotions are always there.
Exactly. One can try and treat yourself and deal with emotions, and you can do interesting things with emotions. There's some interesting experiments they did, how you can actually override pain, for instance, and they do these different experiments. But I want to come back to this whole aspect of, we generate stress just because we want to experience the relief. So our lives become an obsession with finding relief. And you and I have spoken about this. I call it satiation. So whether it comes
satiation,
from,
when you come back to your homeostatic loops, that's just when we get back to baseline, we experience satiation.
that's right. And actually, I'll just try and show a quick picture of that loop. That's just a helpful picture to show how you have this in a homeostasis state. Something would follow what I call a deprivation line, and slowly you get more and more and more hungry. So you get more and more and more hungry, and then when you eat the apple, we've called what I call a satiation event. Get that satiation event, and as you restore the deficit, you feel better, you feel great. That's typically in the human mind, where you fire your dopamine, and you have that memory of that apple, strongly embedded in your mind as a satiation source, as a reward source. um, and all of those things work very nicely with this model. All the dopamine stuff that happens in the real brain, we see, we've got that all sorted with this model. So I think when people look at the biological model, or the brain, they could well ask questions around, how does this happen? How does this happen? And I think the model, the Xzistor model of mind, the mathematical model, actually caters for most of that. It is a principle model, I have to say. So we don't go into the detail. It's a principle model of the mind, and what is important is it's a functional model. So Denise, it's important that those guys that do artificial intelligence and look at this model, they must understand that this is not a bottom-up model. This is not where we go with a microscope and we look at neurons and neural networks, and we look at all the detailed little minuscule little activities that happen around neurons and how they're connected. Luckily, with this model, we don't need that. We don't need that level of detail, because we're coming from a top-down approach, and we say, how does the functions work? How the biological brain achieves the functions that this model prescribes, we're not so much interested in. We do expect to find that the neurons and the neural networks do what the theoretical model does. And you and I have seen evidence of, yes, there we go, there it is, doing exactly what the theory suggests. But certainly people doing artificial intelligence, and they're working from this angle, where they look at neurons and neural activity, neural networks, and simulate those. This is not how this model works. This is a functional model. It's a principle model. But it's an invitation to those guys that work with the neurons and the neural nets to just say, if it gets too complicated, if you feel you're not making progress, take a look at this functional model. Because here we have the robots, they work, and you see them create all the things: emotions, intelligence, solving problems, and you can approach it by, and it's what I call a means agnostic model. So it's means agnostic, and intelligence is means agnostic. So that's just a fancy word for saying how you achieve the functions is not so important. It is that the function is provided.
And how complicated do you think your code is compared to the code that goes behind these natural language models? Like, you're saying that you haven't had to code all the little details. It's just from the top down. These are functional stuff. It doesn't actually seem that you've had to code all that much into the robot to allow it to do what it can do.
It is certainly, I think the burden is less. Once you have the model and you have
Mm-hmm.
the logical schema that you just follow every time, it's just the same schema that you for a set of algorithms, you
Mm-hmm.
code them in. Obviously, it's not a neural network application, so it's a serial way of repeating a specific cycle over and over quickly enough, and it creates the same effect as if it was a parallel system.
Mm-hmm.
Not as fast, but you know what? What I found out is the brain doesn't work so fast in any
It doesn't
case.
work so fast,
Yeah,
no.
so it's real. It stays
It's
realistic.
realistic, right?
It's realistic. You don't see that jittery movement or so. The when Troopy gets going, is with quite confidence that he moves to things and so on. So, but it is a cycle that runs. You can program it.
Right. You're
I have
basically encoding the urgency to restores, the body
yeah,
urgency to restores.
yep,
You're encoding whatever you need from the specific sensors that the robot has, right? And right now
correct.
it has vision,
Yeah, it's audio, which I don't
audio, okay,
use. It's got tactile sensing.
tactile, okay. Which, but it's
Yeah,
not using the tactile sensation for pain though,
it's using it for touch and for pain.
for touch. Okay, so
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. So
because you mentioned
if it
before that it was using light and how fast it was moved, but that's just to get speed, I guess.
let me explain. Let me
Yeah.
explain. Um, Troopy's confined has got a black line on the floor
Mm-hmm.
around it. Inside the black line is a red line. When he moves with the light sensor onto the red line, it's tactile sense. You're
Mm-hmm.
feeling touch now.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, I get it.
Okay. If you go
So he,
past that, if you
so
push
his
past the
tactile
touch,
sense is still vision.
exactly right. Yeah.
There's nothing
And
coming from his
yeah,
extremities. There's no.
yeah.
I
And
don't even
one,
know how you would code for tactile sensation. That must be a difficult one.
oh, one can very easily do that. And I've got a video. I've actually got a video on that on
Mm-hmm.
my YouTube site. Um, something about the motion. I think the video is called Emotion, and it shows exactly that you've got many different sensors you can use if
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to do tactile sense. And I looked at many different sensors um, when I did the model the tactile in the robot. I just settled on this because it was so easy. This comes
Mm-hmm.
pre-integrated with this little Lego Mindstorms platform, um, so it was easy and accurate. And on another day we can have a chat about this
Yeah.
actually at some stage about how you build a model, with all the sensors, and I think people will find it interesting to see how you actually get to the point of building a robot with all these things in. But I think what's important here is this model also teaches you to not expect that everything must work like in the human body. You can use a light sensor to
Mm-hmm.
register, to sense a state. You send it to the brain as a tactile state, and you just say, that's a tactile state. That
Mm-hmm.
means, although it comes from light, it's a signal, it's an electrical signal, and it tells you that you're touching something. So
Right.
so it opens your mind a little bit to these things. Um, yeah, and
Right. It's
I
kind
think
of converted. So, but how does the robot know it's a tactile state?
it doesn't.
It
It,
doesn't.
it
Okay. It
it
doesn't need
learns
to. It
it learns
learns
like a
just that
baby.
if this happens, I must move away.
Exactly. Later in its life,
Mm-hmm.
when it gets more clever, after 15 years or 10 years of so learning, they will have learned the word tactile. They'll understand tactile, and they'll
Right.
understand that they've got a tactile sense. But something interesting that you're mentioning now is when that tactile state moves into the brain, you of course have got the executive part of the brain, that looks at everything that comes in and decides what the brain must do.
It's kind of
So
deciding
all
what does this mean? What does this input mean?
exactly, and
And what should
and
I
I've got
do?
such a simple explanation for all of
Mm-hmm.
this, and this is at a time when people are going berserk on the internet about consciousness. Everybody is onto this whole hunt for consciousness. Um, and when I look at this model, I just think, I need to propose this as a very simple solution, um, Because what you see here is something like a tactile state gets created, it moves into the brain, it presents itself to the executive part of the brain. Say, I feel this. At the same time, emotions is presented to the executive part of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I feel pain. Oh yes, I'm thinking about something which makes me fearful because I'm very close to the wall. All those states get presented to the executive part of the brain, and the
Mm-hmm.
executive part of the brain must then decide, we go with this, we follow on this. For instance, if you put your finger in on the hot stove, there's a reflex coming through to the executive part of the brain, and it just says, ditch everything else. We're going to take our hand out of the fire now, or
Mm-hmm.
off the hot plate. Um, or you might be very, very hungry, and the hunger state that feeds in as an emotion will compete with other states. And we see clearly in the biological brain, exactly like I've mentioned, an area where these things get, states get inhibited, activation takes place, and in the end, the executive part of the brain comes away with most convincing, most urgent is this information here from all the bits that feed into the brain, and they
Mm-hmm.
say we need to solve for this. Um,
That becomes
and
the prime urgency to restore.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. The
The
prime.
prime
Um,
homeostatic
yeah,
restoration
yeah,
mechanism.
yeah. And what's so interesting, Denise, people talk about how do you know your robot actually feels
Mm-hmm.
same like a human. Um, and I've done this in my one book on emotions. I've explained this quite a bit. What we see in the human brain, that these tactile states obviously find their way to the somatosensory cortex, or the S1, like
Mm-hmm.
we like to call it, um, and then create a state there where we can literally say, now there's a tactile state present in the mind, which could be considered. Um, and and I know that if I touch my hand, I, I can consciously feel it. I can
Mm-hmm.
tell you I feel that. When I leave it, I can say I don't feel that. I feel nothing. When I touch my hand again, I feel that. So when we go to this tactile sense, it's very much that the brain is aware of that the instant that you touch. Any tactile sense, as for the other senses, they find their way into the brain immediately in a conscious state.
Mm-hmm.
It's not information that is from the body, some stuff about blood pressure or that you can
Mm-hmm.
that you say, I can't, I don't know what my blood pressure, I don't feel it. But the sensory stuff goes right there, and goes into the typically, let's say, the tactile center of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now here's the interesting thing about this model. I realized that we can ensure a subjective awareness of emotions by casting them into, let's say, a tactile sensory state.
Mm-hmm.
So this might sound a bit weird, but what you do is, as you get more hungry, you actually, you can almost say you rent some real estate in this tactile center of the brain, and you present this emotion or this hunger state as a tactile, or as I call it, a pseudo-tactile state.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the tactile states you're immediately aware of it, you're always conscious of it. Now suddenly there's a tactile state. It doesn't come from a tactile sensor. It comes from a
Mm-hmm.
homeostasis device in the
Right.
brain, which does hunger or thirst or so. But it now creates a state which you learn to associate with, I want to avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
Or it feels good. I eat the apple, I feel better. So it's like you
It's
say,
kind of
like
an internal tactile state, but it's
exactly.
being projected to the same, well, you believe that it's being projected to the same place in the brain as the external on the surface where our skin sensors will project to,
Yeah,
and
exactly
kind of
right. Now
take
there's
real
not,
estate from
yeah.
there.
Now I've seen promising little bits
Mm-hmm.
of people having done measurements in the actual brain
Mm-hmm.
of these sort of emotional states finding their way to that area in the
Yeah.
brain, to S1. Um,
Because like you did bring up blood pressure, but it seems like these internal states of hunger, thirst, they kind of maybe increase blood pressure, sweating, like this anxiety, like response, right? Butterflies in the stomach. So that would be the human sense, but how is it feeling for the robot?
Yeah, exactly right. So,
It's
so,
kind
so,
of getting a beep. Like, what is the robot
yeah.
sensing?
So what we basically do in the robot is we just emulate, or we just create a similar tactile state.
Mm-hmm.
And we just follow exactly the same logic. Where we would have reported the tactile sensing come in, we now take the emotions and we go present them as pseudo-tactile states.
Mm-hmm.
And by just understanding what happens there and presenting it to the brain in the same way, immediately, it's a valid state. It goes to the brain for consideration. Um, the robot has no option but to be aware, as
Mm-hmm.
aware as you and I can be. You know,
Mm-hmm.
just like you and I, the emotions now follow the route of things that get presented to the brain in real time. Every moment, every single moment, you feel heat, you feel pain, you feel cold.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's there, and I mean, you can feel many emotions at the same time. You can feel hungry and thirsty and pain, and you can feel it at the same time. There will only be the prime one that you act on. And so right now, I'm mostly hungry. I'm going to solve that. But
But it isn't really feeling hungry as in how we feel hungry. It's kind of just it's code, right? So it's like,
yeah,
okay, we want it to be at 0, but right now our hunger urgency to restore is at -50. We want to get that back to 0. So that's all it knows, right? And then it knows that this apple, but it never really eats, right? It's
mm-hmm.
a simulated feeding mechanism, a simulated hunger mechanism, a simulated thirst mechanism, simulated
Mm-hmm.
pain.
Yeah,
But at the same time, it brings up questions of like, well, are our emotions just simulations, right? They're just
and and
our
and
report of how the external environment is
yeah,
affecting us. And so when you look at someone else, how do you even know that what they're feeling and what they're reporting they're feeling is true, right? And that is a big question of human
that's
life,
the
is that
whole.
we need to be able to see when we're being deceived or when we're not being deceived.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's this whole hard problem, of
Mm-hmm.
consciousness that people talk about. Now, just
But you
I'm
think it
gonna,
doesn't exist, basically.
uh,
There is no
it
hard
it
problem of
it doesn't
consciousness.
it doesn't exist, and it doesn't exist, and I'm going to go out on a limb now and try and convince you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the hunger that the human feels, the robot principally feels exactly the same. The states that is generated in the human brain to create hunger is replicated in the robot, principally exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. In the human brain, there's only information. It's all that matters is information. In the robot brain, there's only information. Okay? So if you have a homeostasis state in the human body, you generate a signal, you take it to the brain, you activate an area of neurons, and you say, this activation represents hunger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? This means hunger. The representation doesn't understand that, but the executive part of the brain understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the executive part of the brain will work with that and say, there's a strong hunger signal coming through. What have I learned about that? How do I contextualize this? How do I understand it? How do I reason about it? Um, and then it will also feel maybe thirst is not so strong, hunger is stronger. I will decide, we will solve that. But it's important to understand there's no principal difference between what happens in the human brain and in the robot brain.
Mm-hmm.
So if we follow that logic step by step, that's how I would make the case to explain why the subjective sensation of the robot is exactly the same as a human. Um, and literally step by step, we can argue it's a sensory state. It gets turned into a brain representation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it gets analyzed. It goes into competition with others. Um, and really, for it to be present, because we cast it into a sensory state, it means it's going to be present, conscious.
Mm-hmm.
The brain executive part is not going to say to you, there's a few moments now that I wasn't aware that I had pain. That's not going to happen. It's present all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if we say we do that to emotions, exactly the same as in the human mind, it's there all the time. The robot must feel it because it's present and it's being considered, and it can influence in real time the next behavior that the
Mm-hmm.
executive part decides on. And I think I'll leave it at that. But that's my argument, to fight the hard
Right.
problem of consciousness.
You've kind of converted neurons and hormones and neurotransmitters and squishy parts of our being
Mm.
into code, and now you're telling us that that's equivalently the same at the top level, right? Like,
Exactly right. You get the
right.
neuro, you get the hormones, you get all the squishy bits.
Mm-hmm. Like, why do I feel hunger? Like, why do humans
Mm.
feel hunger? Because it's a need that we have for survival, right? That would be
Hmm.
the ultimate mechanism. We need to eat to survive, or to get to the next point.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's kind of, I don't know, it's designed, right? Evolution has kind
Mm.
of designed it that way. And in the same way that you've designed this robot to feel hunger at particular points in time based on an algorithm, right? And what
Yeah,
is, like, whether you're the designer or evolution is the designer, what is the difference there?
that's the question we
Is what
must
you're
ask.
saying.
And
Yeah.
and 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 when we look at the neurotransmitters, and all the neural mechanisms, neural networks, and all the in the body, the visceral sort of parameters that get measured, it's all squishy stuff, but in the end, it just generates information.
Information,
Okay,
right.
is an
Mm-mm.
electrical chemical signal that goes into the brain, and it creates a state in the brain. Uh, and that state, that representation, is what the brain has to work with.
Mm-hmm.
It's all
And
it.
that's
It's all
that's
it
the
gets.
equivalent of the emotional state.
Exactly
An
right.
emotional state that then you're compelled to either solve or maintain if it's a good emotional state.
Exactly right. And so interesting what you're saying. In our brains, in the human brain, we start to call things good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from? What is good? What is bad? And you find this beautiful explanation when you look at these emotions and just say, when you're in a deprivation state, it's bad. Your brain is set up to learn to avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in the code of the robot, we do exactly the same thing. We don't say to a robot, you mustn't be hungry. We say, when you're hungry and you cry and somebody
Mm-hmm.
help you towards the food, we reward you for having found the food. We say, this is the right behavior. In future, you must do this again. It's reinforcement learning. And in the process, by doing that, by implication, we create an avoidance state and an approach state.
Mm-hmm.
So by rewarding that action, we now say hungry is a bad thing. It's to be avoided. Robot only knows that because you've rewarded it when it goes away from hunger, when it does something
Right.
to
It's kind
curb
of
hunger.
changed the state,
Exactly. And I
right?
would
And it's
argue,
gone from like, oh, well, I don't like
mm,
that state, but I do like this state.
exactly.
I want to
And
maintain that and avoid that.
exactly. So it's a lot to do with avoid and approach
Mm-hmm.
states and so on. And once again, all of these very subjective, sometimes very strong emotions, at the heart of it's just information. It's just information. It's just, what is your activation level? Have you reset the activation level? This is an avoidance state. Now the human brain and the robot can get into a state where they say, I don't like that. I like this. This is good. This is bad. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only information,
And it's
but
interesting
it's
because then there must be a biological mechanism that also feeds in to reinforce, daily activities that reward us, right? Like, and there is, like, that's completely in line with basic neuroscience research that we have dopamine signals when we're from food, from water, from avoiding pain, from reaching goals, and also like more complex behaviors as well.
Exactly. And once again, we find in dopamine, to be very honest with you, this whole prediction error thing, this whole thing of you experiencing dopamine when something has changed, when when you expected something and it works out differently. Long before I knew about this prediction error dopamine effect in the biological brain, it all came out of the mathematics. To make my model work, I had no choice but to build that sort of approach in. It's only later that I looked in the biological model and I saw, but they're doing, the same thing, but they use dopamine. And
So
what's
what
so
did you have?
interesting?
You had something called a satiation event, and
It,
how did you
ex-
model that in your mind? You just modeled that as reward.
well, it's a little bit. There's a bit trick to this. It's an interesting one as well. Everything is interesting about the brain. It's something I call reward-based back propagation. So as you go to the apple and you learn to eat the apple, that given moment when you have that satiation, when you experience that reward, the the previous step of what you've experienced is still lingering in the mind, and it gets tagged with a little bit of that satiation as well. So what the robot brain does is it actually rewards a few states before the apple by virtue of the fact that the apple satiated. What's helpful about that is now the robot can actually learn to navigate to the apple. Otherwise, you have to bring it to the apple every time. By giving some of that satiation value to some of the preceding states, the robot now says, there's the green door to the kitchen. I know that makes me feel good because I know it leads to the apple. And the next thing is he learns, well, I can walk from the sitting room now to the kitchen because I go through the wooden door. And when I see the wooden door, when I'm hungry and I see the wooden door, I already feel a bit of satiation. So it's a little bit more complex than that. I'm simplifying it now. I think we must have another video on reward-based back propagation because it's very interesting. But so, like you say, I had to figure out for the life of me, how am I going to make this robot learn not just to appreciate the apple and feel good but to navigate to it from anywhere when it's hungry. And this is where reward-based backpropagation worked well. And this is where I found my little scheme that I worked out to make it all work exactly is what the prediction error of dopamine is. I even came across the way nature solve the problem. So I had a big problem that if you have zero dopamine, let's say you find a reward source, bang, the dopamine goes and you feel good. But what happens if you're disappointed? When you're disappointed, you need a drop in dopamine. So if you at zero, you can't go lower. You can't drop. So I had the same problem in mathematics. And that's where nature cleverly, you haven't got zero dopamine and then you inject dopamine when you have a reward experience. You have a background dopamine level, and it's maintained, and that allows you to actually drop in dopamine or go up in dopamine. And when I look at that, I just think, somebody
It
else,
matches
nature.
perfectly. Yeah, I know. Nature
Yeah.
figured it out as well.
Yeah, nature also
Which
had
is
to wreck its
incredible
brain.
that like you didn't have any of this knowledge and you're able to come up with these basic principles that kind of match what we've now over 50 years of neuroscience or 100 years of neuroscience research kind of carefully figured out, even though there's a lot of debate in the dopamine field over what dopamine is actually doing, whether it's reward prediction, aversive states, pleasure. There's a lot to work out there, but it seems like your model is kind of converging in on all of that. And we will talk more about this in future videos. So I guess my last question to you is that, as we're running out of time here, is that your model is quite unique in that you've modeled hunger and thirst and pain into your robots. Basic human bodily problems, I guess I'll call them, like
Yeah.
needs, right? Like
Which reminds me, yeah.
there are things that intelligent people don't spend their time thinking about. I do, because they're one of my interests in the, like, you can kind of see that there's many other body UTRs to do with, like, us being like social creatures. You can derive a lot more, right? But people don't spend their time thinking that these, like, hunger and thirst, are important things to talk about or to model. So what is your response to critics that would see your model as modeling too basic a thing to be modeling intelligence, right? Like, why is hunger, thirst, pain important for your model of intelligence?
Yeah,
And
no, it's a
are
very
they
good question.
needed? Are
It's
they
a very
needed at all, right? Like, could you
it,
model your robot to do other stuff than, you know,
yeah,
simulate apples to eat, to eat
it's a
in
yeah,
order
no.
to solve simulated hunger?
Mhm. It's a very good question, Denise. And once again, I've had some funny looks in my life. When I start to make the case of this robot can get hungry, it can feel thirsty, and it feels pain and so on. But I think what makes it very, very helpful to understand, to use the hunger or thirst or something simple like that, and to just get your head around the algorithm, and the basic logic. So the moment you understand that, you can extrapolate this, or you can take it to other robotic applications. Um, a simple example is, for instance, you often see that these new robotic devices learn to navigate to their charging station. So you'll see somebody,
Right.
something. My friend in New Zealand has got a lawnmower, that sort of autonomous thing that goes up and down the lawn and cuts the lawn. And when it runs low on on power, battery power, it would sort of navigate back in reverse onto this charging station. And that's also pre-programmed. It's not really comparable. But if you want to have a system learn through operand learning and reinforcement learning to do this, you can, for instance, let me give you an example. Let's say we have a colony of Xzistor robots on Mars, which, by the way, I think is a much better idea than to send humans there. Um,
Mm.
let's send a bunch of robots there, and we can even program them to be happy not to see the sun or stuff like that, or to be
Mm-hmm.
cold, or to be breathing carbon dioxide. So let's say we've got a bunch of robots there, and we want them to operate autonomously. So we have trained them a little bit to find the fact that they need their battery charge area. So now they could explore around Mars, take photos, take measurements, do stuff. And when they feel they're getting hungry, the
Mm-hmm.
battery runs low, it's now learned to navigate back. Um, and as it explores this novel environment, it'll learn to navigate back from whatever area it finds. There's a rock, there's a mountain, there's that area. I get back to home base to charge. So, and you can, in your mind, you can now see lots of applications for that sort of algorithm.
So you
You
can
know,
basically design the body UTRs to be whatever you want,
whatever you want. You
whatever you want.
absolutely,
But it's the
absolutely.
you believe that it's the emotional capacity of the robot that allows it to learn autonomously. Like, no other robots or AIs that have been developed so far can learn autonomously.
I think it's difficult to learn
Mm-hmm.
and to be as smart. And I'm just very proud of my system here, as smart as Exister, because obviously
Mm-hmm.
um, you now have emotions feeding every single association. These emotions speak to the most basic needs of that robot. Okay, so what to you and me is thirst and hunger and cold and
Mm-hmm.
fear, all those things we can choose. We can design it into a robot and say, you're not so fussed about oxygen like humans. You're worried about cooling your computers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you need cool air through your computers. That's your emotion. We're going to make you feel very uncomfortable if that's not right, and then you've got to do something. You've got to learn to do something about it. As your association database grows, you can then take that information and say, these are the things I've learned in the past. to solve this problem. And like we've mentioned before, if you build in the anxiety or the stress state into the robot as well, that allostasis emotion, it'll actually sit quietly in its room thinking, and it'll think, I feel uncomfortable when I think about having a problem with my cooling fan. What can I do about it? Oh, yes, the manual says that. Oh, I feel better now. That is the solution. You know, don't go
Hmm.
out, you know, into the sunlight or, direct sun or something like that. So the options for this thing to learn and get more smart is really at another level.
Right.
Um,
It seems to me that you can't just send them, though, like as baby robots onto Mars. You're going to have some simulated center. But as we do with pilots, right, and a lot of other things, there's always to learn. You need to have the experience before actually going out on the real device. So you'd have to simulate it on Earth, what kind of conditions they might meet before sending them out, where they can kind of pattern match. Oh, that looks similar to what I experienced back in
e-
the home base. So
exactly right.
there's still a lot of training involved as though they are baby robots.
There is now, like I said
And can you
before,
speed up that training? I guess is the big
you can. Yeah,
question.
I was just gonna. I
Yeah.
was gonna just
Eh.
exactly say exact. So obviously, you can, once you've designed these to work like humans, they will be like babies. So when you switch them on, they're like a baby, and then you have to train them. Now, what I do is with Troopy, I train him for 3 or 4 hours, and I push one button, and I save the whole association database to file. So tomorrow night, the next night, I switch on Droopy. I don't want to teach him again, to explore and experience an apple and start to slowly learn to navigate to the apple. I push one button and it imports that whole learned database. And immediately the little face flashes up and say, I know what to do. And he walks to the apple and it eats the apple. So that whole pre-training one can also use, because it's a digital system, not so easy to do with a human system. With a digital system or with a neural system, one can do that. So you can do that pre-training on Earth, prepare the robots for those basic things, just the
Hmm.
basic things. And when you let them loose, they know the basics and they learn the rest. They learn by themselves.
Right.
So I would train Troopy for an hour or two, three, and then I'll go downstairs and make coffee and eat something and so on. And he will carry on here, learning, because I make him play when he's not
Hmm.
hungry, and as he plays, he moves to different areas in the confine, and then he has to find his way back, and he
Right.
does
We need
that.
to talk about the importance of play in another
Yeah,
video as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
And
yeah.
why is play another body UTR? It's a
Um,
basic need, or is it a brain UTR? Or it's
playing,
something separate?
yeah, playing is in the pursuit of satiation again.
Hmm.
Okay, so really, playing falls in that category of generating stress where there is
Hmm.
no stress for the sake of having fun.
Hmm.
So, look, children playing hide and seek, build up some stress, some suspense. I'm hiding. Is he going to find me? Is he not going to find me? And then a big, you know, burst
Hmm.
of laughter afterwards, and lots of fun. So playing is in the vein of being stimulated,
Hmm.
and generating small amounts of tension just for the sake of finding the relief.
Right.
Okay, so children will play to do that.
Hmm.
Parents might go to a pub quiz to have a bit of fun, and it's the same thing, generate a bit of tension and the relief, tension, relief. It's these undulations. Um,
Hmm.
and even guy playing a computer game, it's the same fun, there's definite tension. It's like somebody's going to shoot at me. I must shoot first, you know.
Hmm.
So playing is interesting. It's actually all about artificially generating some
Right.
stress, some anxiety, that
It's to
and
do
and
with
and
uncertainty, exploration of the environment, trying to decrease uncertainty, or even trying to generate uncertainty in
yeah,
a
yeah,
way.
exactly right. And to be honest, our lives as humans are absolutely dictated by the search for satiation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we from the day we're born till the day we die, it's a
We just
machine.
want to feel good.
It's a machine that does many fancy things,
Yeah.
system of systems,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end, it just want to feel good. You just want to feel
Mm-hmm.
good. You just want to stay on top of your emotions and deal
Mm-hmm.
with your fears, and that takes you through life.
We want to kind
So
of reduce stress in order
yeah,
to, experience that safety, calm, pleasure, joy, right?
e- exactly,
And it's all about optimizing our systems in order to do that.
yeah, and words like pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
joy, calm, they only exist because we can enter this state of satiation.
Mm-hmm.
It's words that we've learned to call things, which is just satiation. Um,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. So there's the human absolutely selfishly fixated on solving these emotions and always trying to optimize its state of satiation.
Mm-hmm.
And then weirdly, it'll go and even generate stress to feel satiation when it's not
Right.
preoccupied with finding food. And it's
Mm-hmm.
still a bit of a mystery to me that you will actually risk your life. You do scary things, just
To actually
for that,
find this satiation.
find the rush. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's we can have a long philosophical discussion
Yeah.
about why that is built into nature. Why you want some people to take chances, to be not so risk averse,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe have that part as your gene pool. For survival of the species. It's another
Mm-hmm.
discussion, but
It's for
it is,
another time.
and the human brain is just it just
Yeah.
is fascinating. And to be
And
honest,
it,
yeah, this sorry, just to say, to finish over this.
yeah.
So this exists a mathematical model of mind. It really brings new insights every single day of my life. I've been hidden myself away. I've been ignoring what everybody else does. I've absolutely gone down this rabbit hole. It's working. And you know what? Every day of my life, I stumble over something where I just think, that's interesting. I haven't thought of that, before. And it's the brain model showing me it's normally something to do with, it works the same in the biological brain.
Mm-hmm.
So many discoveries. You read stuff and you say, I could have told you that. I knew that. It's helpful. The other day I was in a cancer ward, somebody that's ill, and I walked down the cancer ward and I saw something about, like, oxygen treatment, and I thought to myself, of course, oxygen treatment, of course, that will make you feel better. And you, every day you see these things, and I think it's important to understand that this model can really, really help us understand conditions like depression,
Mm-hmm.
addiction, anxiety. Here is functional mechanisms that one can work with and so even
Right.
simulate. So anyway, I
And
get
we'll
too
be
excited.
discussing all of these things in future videos, right?
Yeah,
It's been
yeah.
really, really interesting talking to you. I think we're going to be cut off soon.
Okay, 100%. Denise, thank you very much. I always like
We can really
enjoy.
see that you're excited about this model. You've worked very hard for many, many years behind this. You have a lot of knowledge. It's very, thank you for sharing it with us. And it seems like something that gives you a lot of satiation, as you would say.
And thank you, Denise. And I must say, I'm really surprised that somebody's come out of the blue and actually discovered this model for themselves. And I think it's equally fascinating to myself that you came from the neuroscience side, and followed your own modeling, and then really looked at my model and recognized in it, the same stuff that you're doing. So that's
Mm-hmm.
also
It's
great,
been
and
a
we need.
fascinating journey, kind of
Yeah.
matching the two together for sure from my
So
end. And just
yes.
like, I guess that recognition, right? Of like, oh, look, there's another person that kind of is thinking the exact same things.
Exactly right. So let's continue the collaboration. I am,
Yep,
really
definitely.
interested.
Thank you so much.
Good. You're welcome.